Okay, hi there. Welcome to the webinar called How to Do Agile Software Development. I'm going to use next 30-40 minutes to just give you some of my thoughts, what it means to be implementing or using Agile software development. So the focus will be on some discussion about general methodology, estimating, planning, and requirements. So we'll start with my favorite quote from Robert C. Martin. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with him, Uncle Bob, who said the only way to go fast is to go well. A little bit about myself. I've been in the software industry for about 20 years. I've been working as a software engineer for about 10 years. And after that, I decided to join as we call, dark side of software engineering, which means project management. And been focusing on managing projects, managing and organizing teams. Been introduced to Agile in 2007, and from 2008, I've been doing coaching and training people in using Agile. I've been working in different companies, some of them been mainly in England. I spent about 13 years. So companies like Vujkov, Sony Ericsson, Promethean, and Barclays Bank. And in last 3 years, or 3.5 years, I've been working with Schneider Electric EMS. I'm certified Scrum Master, Scale Agile Framework practitioner, and Prince 2 practitioner as well. Prince 2 is Project and Control Environment. And you can see my email address if you have any questions after this webinar. Feel free to just drop me an email. Yeah. Okay. So as I said, we will talk a little bit more about what's Agile in software development. Yeah. I'll try to keep this to the maximum 35, maybe 40 minutes, and I'll leave some time for some of your questions. So first of all, let's start with the one question for you to think a little bit about that. So question is, you as a leader in your development department, or you as a leader in your team, what's your mission? Is your mission to increase the output of that team, or is your mission to optimize the value of your output? Or is it both? And if it's both, which the order? So if we go back to the lean principles, which is heavily embedded in Agile, the suggestion is to go first with establishing the flow, and after that, you try to improve utilization or increase output. One thing to remember for all of us who work in the software industry, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. That's our purpose. That's what defines us, and that's what going to make us to be the leader in what we do or when we make software. Let's start with a main question, which is traditional versus Agile delivery. What's the difference? So in history, we had main or default, should I say, methodology for developing software was traditional or better known as a waterfall methodology. What's the challenges with that methodology? The challenges are following. First of all, I think this is my experience. That waterfall you can use in a project which I like to call that in a simple environment. What that means? It means that you have very well defined set of requirements, very well understood. You know very well domain and technology which you're going to use to develop that product, and you can easily predict step how to achieve that product. So the question is, how many projects are in that kind of environment? Unfortunately, the majority of our projects are a very complex environment. So things are not that well known. Customers are not completely clear what they want. We're not familiar that much with or completely familiar with technology and that kind of stuff. So another interesting point about waterfall methodology is based on the assumption that moving from one stage to another, for example, in some plan which you create, usually using Microsoft Project or Gantt chart, if you like, there is always assumption that each output of that each stage will be positive. So moving from one stage to another, you have always positive outputs. Unfortunately, that's not always like that. Why I'm saying that? Because, as you know, software, when you're building software doesn't work always. You know, software doesn't integrate well. We have a problem with some technology. People get sick. Hardware doesn't work. So it's all sorts of different problems which can cause us lots of risks and lots of issues, and who can jeopardize that plan which we created at the beginning of the project. Another thing is that one of typical requirements for traditional waterfall projects is that at the beginning we have a requirement analysis phase where we upfront define all requirements to the great details, or we create detailed specification, and in that specification we specify what we expect from product, what we expect product to how this product should behave, yeah. And after that, when we have this set of requirements, we just one second. Okay, sorry, apologies. There's some technical issue. Okay, so okay, so let's continue. So there is a question: what's the problem with all that? And what we have situation here that based on this requirement, we create project management usually create a detailed plan, and that's usually the time when we have the least knowledge about product. So we have some knowledge which is expressed through requirements, but generally speaking about final product, we have least level of knowledge. And after that, development team have a very challenging job to implement this and satisfy this set of requirements. What happens if during development we discover some changes and we want some, or customers want something to change? We go to this very rigid change control. And another thing is that usually we have engagement from the client or customer at the beginning of our project, and usually at the end when we have UAT or user acceptance testing. Challenge with that is that at UAT, user acceptance testing, when client or customer discovers something doesn't work, is not happy, and we don't have time to address this very well. And that's when usually starting something what we call blaming games between client and development. And here comes jeopardy for one of our customer value, which is delight the customer. Yeah? So we can talk about software requirement. What's the problem? Software requirement is a communication problem. Yeah, there is three aspects here. Yeah, one of them, there needs to be balance between business and technical people. If either, I mean, business side of the company present the customer, or responsible for return of investment, and the technical side of the company is responsible for developing that. If either of these side dominates, we have problem. For example, if business side dominates, we have milestones and scope which is imposed on development team without any regards or consideration what development team or technical guys are saying. And the other way, if technical guys are dominant, we have Usually requirement described using lots of technical jargons, yeah? And remember, it's not the job of customer to learn our technical jargons, it's other way around. We should learn business language because business language is much simpler. The second thing is, the second question is, who is responsible for resource allocation? If business is responsible for allocating people on certain things, we can end up having like a couple months on the analysis phases, creating this big, thick spec of which describes our requirement. Or other way around, if you have technical guys responsible, what you have usually, you have the technical guys may jeopardize quality for extra feature or jeopardize extra feature for some extra quality, refactoring, designing, whatever they see appropriate. Yeah. And the third thing is we cannot perfectly predict software schedule. So what we do, there is a question. We make decision based on information which we have, and we do this very often, and we spread out decision making throughout the project. And that's when user stories comes in. It's user stories is one of the technique coming from extreme programming. Ken Bank, one of the creators of extreme programming, coined that term. And for user story is just one of the techniques for defining requirements, and one of the technique which is used by lots of team who is using, for example, Scrum or Kanban or of course extreme programming frameworks. Yeah, and what's the characteristic of user stories? Yeah, so user stories represent user needs. They represent some description of some feature of a final product. They represent a planning item. They represent token for further conversation. They have two aspects. They have user who is using the product, how will they use the product, and what will do with that product. And we have a story which describes how user interact with that product. Usually, lots of companies and lots of teams are using the template. Say there's a type of user, I want that feature, so they have that benefit. Yeah, and with user story, we have a lesson as well in how quality can be built in rather than being looked after when we complete development. So what we do, first of all, for any of requirements which we want to develop in the next sprint or sprint after, we try to discover all details, all necessary information. So we get to know that requirement reasonably well. And after that, we define as well acceptance criteria. And after that, when we complete that requirement, we implement that requirement, we can test to see how to satisfy that acceptance criteria or condition of satisfaction. I will remind you that one of the biggest ways in the life of software engineers is to work on the requirements he doesn't understand. If that's the situation in your company, that one thing which you should do, you should definitely try to make your requirement more, as we call, ready. So the requirement which is detailed enough, have enough information so the development team can understand this much better, and it helps him to team to find a way how to implement this. Yeah. I would say that user stories is a practice from extreme programming, and the focus was that the essence of user stories is discussion between user and the team about what this story is all about, and that's let's say a lot of teams have a struggling with that kind of concept. So I'll remind you again, its essence of user story is discussion. Yeah. So Ron Jeffries, one of another guy from Extreme Programming World, said that each user story should have triple C associated with that. So card, conversation, confirmation. But the card is a physical media for collecting information about requirement. You have confirmation, so gathering the details, usually face to face. dialogue between either customer, which is, for you who know extreme programming, you know the customer is one who is direct communication with the team. Or if you're working in the world of Scrum, it's usually product owner, yeah, or Kanban. So details are discovered through communication between someone who represents the business or customer and development team. And the third part is, of course, there is a confirmation. How we know that what we've done is right, how we know what to implement, and this kind of stuff, yeah? So each story has something called acceptance criteria, or something called conditional satisfaction. When we have usual problem, when we have problem, we need to do some heavyweight tools. So the card are meant to be a low tech, high touch approach, using a boards or some of your rules or whatever you're using. Yeah, when you use things like tools like TFS or Jira or Rally or whatever you're using, what usually happens is that kind of conversation between the business and the development team is not at the level it's supposed to be, or for some reason disappears, or being transferred to some kind of written communication. And because of that, there is lots of misunderstanding about acceptance criteria or missing acceptance criteria, and that's all cause all sorts of problems. So we don't have ready user stories for development team to implement the next sprint. Yeah. Okay. A little bit about form. So form, as I said, is as a rule, I want activities to have business value. Why this form? It's not mandatory, but it's very useful. Lots of companies, particularly one who has very feature-based development, who are using lots of functional requirements, are using this. For the guys who is developing more technical stuff, there is a question: what's the value of using that template? As a rule, I want activities, so I have business value. There is a three aspect here. Role. So we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the user, see what he wants, what exactly is value for him. So role is one who is performing that action or that activity. Can be another system, doesn't need to be human. A role allows us some segmentation as well, so we can discover some different requirements. Activity is what exactly is the requirement all about. And business value represents value to the business. Why this activity is needed. There's a question why we're insisting on that business value. We want to understand what kind of things we're resolving for client. What's the problem for him? What are we resolving some, for example, legislation issue, regulation issue, or are we discovering some? Are we resolving some problems which we have, or we giving some competitive advantage in the market? Yeah, this usually helps team to find alternative solution, which can require less effort. Yeah. So usually, in my experience, when requirement doesn't have business value, that's first indication that we may not know what exactly and why we implement some of these requirements. Yeah. There's a questions. Okay, so I have description as a, for example, here as an advisor, I want to be able to view all my clients, so I can see all my clients in one place. Is that enough for development? Is that enough for someone who represents the business? Of course not. So we need to have some details, and they usually written as acceptance criteria. And what happens to them? They usually transfer to the test. But let's not confuse acceptance criteria with some functional unit tests. The difference is that functional, or for example, unit tests goes much deeper to testing some of the flow through the code, some exceptional flows, some boundary conditions, and usually have bugs and that kind of stuff. Acceptance criteria are more conditional satisfaction, which we which put on the system. Yeah, and they're usually written on the back of that card. If you see the card, when we've written the user story description, on the back of the card, we usually write acceptance criteria. And why is that? Usually that card is the size of C, for example, 6 by 4 inches. Why is that size? It shows that in that card you can write some level of details, but not too many details. Yeah. So we talk a little about requirements. So the product backlog can be collection of user stories. And if you look this slide, you can see there is few lines to the product backlog. So in the product backlog, we have collection of requirements for some product which one develop. Yeah. So there is a different level of details for different requirement, different sizes of requirement. So you can have this huge, big requirements which requires more than not more than one sprint, more than one release to develop. Yeah, and they have some details, but not even close enough. So it requires some additional effort to discover all these details. But for the sprint, you you should have a ready user story. So user story which is small enough that can be implemented in one sprint, detailed enough so the team can discover how that implement. You need to have something which we call invest, immediately actionable, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small enough, and estimable, and small enough and testable. Yeah. So that's kind of what we consider when you say the user story is satisfied definition ready or is ready to be implemented. So if you can see here, these small requirements are ready for implementation. On the release level, we have a little bit bigger requirement. Over the time, we gather more informations. We split these bigger requirements in smaller one. We add additional information in the manner of just in time and with just enough details. Yeah. So when we implement certain requirements in one sprint, we move to the next sprint. We transfer something in that sprint, and continue like this. It's important as well because we live in the world where there is always schedule limit. So you always develop, or most of the time, you develop software which need to be delivered at a certain time. So we need to prioritize or order our requirements so that we can make projection, see if that's if we can deliver software at a certain date. So for prioritization, we use, or I use, in my experience, is to use the following criteria. So business value, which is typical. Cost, so you want to know estimation. If some of the requirements is bigger than the other, but similar value, obviously you'll take smaller one. And the other way around, if you have the same estimation, have bigger value, you will take that one which has bigger value. And another thing is risk. Some of these requirements carry on some significant risk which you want to address as soon as possible, and sometimes you have a knowledge which you gain about domain or about technology. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about planning. And I said here a level of agile planning. To be honest, you can apply this to any kind of planning. So you have usually a company has some kind of vision or mission, should I say? They want to do something, and they choose strategy how to achieve that. And that strategy usually translates in some kind of product, one or many. And after that, you have portfolio or roadmap of this product. Within that portfolio, you have some vision of your product which you want to develop. It can be one, many products, many versions, many increments of that product. And within that portfolio, you have a release. Within the release, you have sprint. And within sprint, you have something called daily stand-up. So agile teams usually have influence on the last three: release, sprint, and daily stand-up. And someone who is senior stakeholders have decision on the top three. I like to add this additional 3 layers, yeah, or levels. And I say, if you want to have a successful day and in successful sprints, a successful release, you should implement or use some of these techniques. One of them being pair programming, one of them being writing unit test, one of them being continuous integration in your software. Yeah, and by my experience, these kind of techniques can help and does help having more successful sprints, so delivering potential shippable product income at the end of the sprint, having more successful releases. So there's a question: what makes planning agile? So I will remind you on the few things here. So going back to Agile Manifesto, one of the values in Agile Manifesto says responding to change over following a plan. So we need to have some plan, but we need to be able to respond to change. And the second principle of Agile, second Agile principle from Manifesto say, welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. So obviously we need to have a plan, but equally we need to embrace the change, because the change is factor of life, particularly in our industry these days. You can lock yourself away from the customer for that long time and deliver that product and expecting that at the end of that journey you will have very satisfied customer. So things will change. So we need to find a way how we take these changes with us, and that's usually through the project, to the process called Agile planning. Rather than being obsessed with the plan, we focus on the process of planning. Yeah, during Agile planning we make decisions throughout the project using a spec and adapt mechanism of empirical process. Yeah, so software engineering is empirical process. We learn a lot from our experience, and I would say Agile planning, usually the level of Agile team has three levels. So as I said, the release, sprint, and daily. So uncertainty about product, uncertainty about how we're going to implement that, it's famously known end and means uncertainty, needs to be taken into consideration, needs to be acknowledged. So our planning needs to take this into consideration. Incremental iterative nature of Agile product development usually help us reducing that uncertainty. Yeah? So going back to question, what makes planning Agile? First of all, focus more on planning than the plan. We need to embrace the change. We need to create plans which are easy to change, and we need to spread out planning throughout the project. So let's have a look at a simple example here. So we have release, we have some conditional satisfaction, usually scope, schedule, and budget. Typical three things we define majority of our project, including quality, of course. We have release planning, which is usually can be 1 or 2 days workshop, or can be many days workshop. What happened at workshop? Teams, one team or many teams, look at the requirements, try to groom them as much as they can, and estimate them. And based on this information, and based on information about how long is going to be a project, how many sprints we're going to have, how big is the scope, how many teams, what their velocity is, we're trying to make some release plan. Yeah. When we get some release plan, we go to the sprint planning. So for the next sprint, we are taking some of the subset of product backlog, the most top priority requirements which want by business. We try to understand them, what acceptance criteria, what the tests are. And during the sprint planning process, we discovering what are requirements. And after that, in the second part, we want to understand how we're going to implement that. And when we finish with that, we have sprint backlog, which represent in some sense our plan for the sprint. And we go with sprint execution, and in the end we expect done product increment or potentially shippable product increment. Yeah. When we get at the end of the sprint, we have some feedback, and we look how this feedback influence next sprint, or how this sprint influence overall release. Are we delivering what we're expecting? Our velocity going up or going down? Is it changing too much? What risks we're carrying with us? Are we address some of these risks? So after each sprint, we can evaluate release plan and see if it is viable or not. And we continue like this after each sprint. That's the kind of nature of the Agile planning. If things change, and we discover that we can deliver everything, what we do, we try to descope some of less priority requirements so that we can still achieve some goals. So Scrum and in particular Agile is based on the assumption that you can use scope as a leveraging tool of degree of freedom so you can achieve that business goal that you have in front of one of many of your teams. Yeah. Equally, if you during development discover more requirements, you can add this to the backlog, and you can prioritize with the remaining of your backlog, and you can evaluate if that new discovery is more important what's in the backlog or not. Of course, for the planning, you need to have some estimation. So there are different school of thoughts here. There is a movement called no estimating, and there are people who are insisting on estimating. Either way, we need to have some information which should help us with some projection in terms of release. If you're going with no estimating approach, what's usually based on is accounting how many requirements you have, how many did you deliver, and you try to do projection on that. For the guys who are using the estimating, they usually estimate requirement using something which is called story points or ideal days or whatever they're using. And they want, based on that information, to see how many points are in the backlog and how much team delivers and do projections on that. Using either of these techniques, a very important thing about estimating is that during process estimation, not only we estimating some requirements, but we equally discussing that requirement. We try to discover that within the team we have the same understanding of requirement. So there is no some assumption which I don't know, me as a developer have or me as a tester have, and the other side doesn't see that. You know, so remember the requirements is done when we finish all things which is needed for that requirement. Yeah. So if we go back to this slide, we can see here product backlog, which is a collection of user stories, and we have sprint backlog, which is a subset of that backlog, and we have some tasks. So for the requirements in product backlog, teams, as I said, usually using the story points. For the task, they're using they can use story points as well, or they can use hours. What's the difference? So story points, I think, is a probably most used technique for the estimating the requirements. Bear in mind that user story have some level of missing information, so they're not perfectly understood requirements. Yeah, remember what we said. User stories, as essence of user stories, discovering details with communication with the customers. Yeah, with the task on the other hand, with the task. So we're talking about concrete step to implement something. We should have enough information so we can use hours. Difference is absolute versus relative estimation. So for the hours and for the task, concrete task, we can use absolute estimation because we should know what first day we're going to do with that requirement, what second day and third and so on. With requirements, we don't need to have absolute estimation. We're using something called relative sizing. So it's important for us to know, for example, if we have story which value 10 points and we have story which value like 5 points, it's indication that this 10 story point takes twice as big effort than the 5-point story. And we can use that on we can base this estimation on just kind of a limited level of information. You don't need to have all information to use relative sizing. And some companies using this t-shirt size as well, particular for the portfolio backlog. If you have like that kind of a backlog, what's the key for the relative sizing? The key is that, as I said, we estimate size. We have some calculation, and from there we derive duration. So when we estimate size, or should I say complexity, we think about effort, but we take into consideration volume of work, uncertainty, risks, complexity, whatever, help us to understand the size of that requirement. And calculation usually represent team's velocity. So we have size and velocity. We can discover how many sprints we need. Yeah. Team velocity represent the number of points which the team can deliver per sprint. They're based on the historical data and can be used to forecasting future iterations without knowing some kind of team velocity, which can be as I said, measure in the points or the number of user stories, whatever technique you want to use. Based on this velocity, based on the excuse me, of the size of the backlog, we can do prediction how many iterations do we need. What happened? How we get this value, team velocity? So usually you can use historical data. Be careful with that. If your team changed size, if this project is not the similar as the previous one, the technology is different. Historical data in that case you need to be used with a lot of caution. Yeah, so be very careful with that. The best thing is to run few sprints, 2 to 3, to get some data, or use forecasting. Yeah. And another important thing about team velocity should be expressed is a range. And range, the size of that range show how much we are familiar with the domain of technology and how established is the team. Is the team still in forming, or maybe is it storming, norming, or performing phase of maturity of that team? With that estimation, we go back to the planning. So we have 3 levels of planning. So we have release, sprint, and daily, with 3 levels of precision. Obviously, on the release level, we have some targeted scope which we want to deliver. On the sprint level, we have set of user story which we want team to deliver in the next sprint. And daily plan, we have most up-to-date information. So we did some development. We have the latest information. And based on this latest information on the daily stand-up, we can sync our work within the team and identify some impediments which slows us down and try to resolve them and achieve that goal which we have in front of us. Yeah. Okay, so release planning usually gives answer the following questions: how much will be done by certain date? When we can ship certain number of features, and how many people do we need? That's usually questions that you have on any project. Yeah. Input is usually backlog, size or cost, if you like, length of project, and team's velocity. And based on that information, during the release planning event, which I said can be a 1 to 2 day workshop, or can be activities ongoing, or can be, I don't know, whatever is suitable in your company. During that activity or meeting, if you like, whatever you prefer, you're trying to target what will be, what you want in first, maybe second sprint, and what you want for the remaining number of sprints which you have. Yeah? My main focus is on the first few sprints. In terms of sprint planning, obviously you have some work which you already did. We have product backlog, which is groomed enough or refined enough, if you like, prioritized. And you have someone who represents the business in the world of Scrum, that's a product owner who had certain number of requirements which he wants team to be focused on next sprint. He wants to maximize the output of that team, optimize value of that team. Remember, that's one of the key skills of product owner in Scrum world. And the team discuss this with product owner or representative business or customer if they're lucky enough. And they, after that, create a sprint backlog, like a subset of the product backlog with few user stories or requirements in set of tasks which are needed for the implementation of that requirement. I would say for mature team, identification of concrete tasks, technical tasks for implementation and their estimation is not necessarily needed. So when the teams are new to Agile, that technique is very useful. When the team is mature enough, that technique of identify task, estimation task, in absolute values using hours or days or points, whatever you want, is less important. Few words about Scrum. Scrum framework is one of the framework within Agile. That's a Scrum framework. Scrum is a framework of practice which is tied together with small set of clearly defined rules. Yeah. And there is a difference between framework and method. Method implies one approach to each environment that you use that method. On the other hand, framework allow you to do a little bit different approaches depends on the environment that you're using. So if you're applying Scrum in one company, that necessarily means that you will roll out the same way as you do the other. So it depends on the domain, depends on the company, depends on the company culture and this kind of stuff. Bear in mind that each changes which you do in any company requires a few things. The change needs to be top down, bottom up. Second, there is no universal best template for each change which you apply to each company. You can use examples or can use experience from other companies. Each change needs to be incremental and iterative. So one thing at a time, and you need to experiment. There is no ultimate solution. Don't even try to find the perfect solution, because the problem which you try to resolve will adapt and will change, and you will need to eventually change your approach again. So try, experiment, see what you get. Use inspect and adapt mechanism of this framework. So going back to Scrum. So creator of Scrum said creator of Scrum said that each element of Scrum has a very important role, and they have a purpose in Scrum framework. So if you want to implement Scrum framework the right way, you need to implement all elements of Scrum. You need to holistically implement Scrum. If you don't, that's not the Scrum. And Ken Schreiber said once, Scrum is like a chess. You play chess with 32 pieces. That's a chess. If you play with 20, that's not a chess. It's something else. That's not a chess. Yeah. Similar with Scrum. So it's meant to be holistically used and implemented. The good thing is that it's lightweight, simple to understand, difficult to master. And the question, lots of companies struggling with that concept, to be honest. When you implement Scrum, there is always fight in quotes, if you like, between the company culture and Scrum framework. Some of practices of Scrum are very consistent with the culture of organization. So what the organization is trying to do, trying to adapt Scrum framework to company culture rather than being the other way around. Typical examples: managers want your estimation to be precise. They want estimation to happen. So if you say I'll do something in 3 days, they want that to be done in 3 days, no matter what. What happened in that kind of environment? Usually, for teams to achieve that estimation, they sacrifice one thing and one thing only. It's called quality. And with the sacrifice quality, we have lots of problems after that. Yeah. The second example is that, and you can ask yourself following questions: how much freedom each of your, if you're using the Scrum framework, how much freedom each of your Scrum team has to, after retrospective, if they identify some action items, how much freedom they have to improve their practices, their techniques, or are they depend on someone else to kind of approve that kind of improvement, if you like. So if you're in this position that you always have someone who needs to prove any kind of improvement, that's not Agile. That's not even close to be Agile. So think about that. So that's one of the challenges. Yeah. I would remind you, Scrum ultimately depends on 3 things: people, and they're the best things that you have in our companies. We employ them because they have skills, expertise, knowledge, and we want to utilize that. And the Scrum is based on empiricism, and we are thinking about value. So people employ empiricism to optimize the value of their work. That's important. Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schreiber, which are creators of Scrum, they had one goal in their head when they introduced from my opinion, sorry, when they introduced Scrum framework. From my opinion, they want to help company to achieve following three objectives. One, and to this objective in some kind of sustainable manner. One of them having sustainable increase in value delivered by the team. Two, sustainable decrease in waste, which you have in your procedures and processes. And three, sustainable management of risks exposure to within some risk tolerance. Yeah. So these three things are very important. Lots of companies expect for Scrum framework to be some kind of silver bullet or cookbook which give them answers to any questions, any problems that they have. And usually they're very disappointing when they hear that there is no certain rules. There are few very simple rules, very well-defined rules, which tie together practices within the framework. And Ken Schwaber said once, if there is no rule stated in the framework, expectation from the users of Scrum is that they figure out what to do. And the suggestion is that they're not trying to find perfect solution because the problem may evolve. So trying, experimenting, using this inspect and adapt mechanism of Scrum empirical nature will usually guide their team. So what this company usually trying to do, they're trying to add some additional practices. Unfortunately, some of them are very anti-Scrum, anti-patterns. So I mentioned a few of them here. For example, test sprints. So what usually companies have, they have a bunch of sprints, which are usually development sprints, and they have after that 1 or 2 sprints, which they're doing testing. So what they're doing clear waterfall. That's not the goal of Scrum framework. The second one is never-ending sprint zero. This is an unfortunate name for the activities which you can describe as a release planning or something like that. So what happened is that companies never happy enough to start with a regular sprint. Yeah, so they do this analysis, for example, phase far too long. Yeah, and they never actually allow a team to start doing development. The third thing is random size sprints. You have things like changing the sprint size depends on the things. You know, things change, and they want to change size. Or I want 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, maybe 4 week sprints. You know, they want to try certain things, and that's okay at the beginning. But once when you pick the size of the sprint, you should stick with that. Yeah, because you should send message to the team that we have sprints which is have, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, and you know, you have start at the beginning of sprint and end of the sprint. Yeah? And another thing is estimation, isolation. We still have companies which depends on the estimation from very technical guys. Estimation is a team effort. People who should the work should do estimation. My favorite, servant leader versus command and control. So you have Scrum Masters who are being in the role of project manager, very command and control, or you have managers who declare themselves as very agile, but they're still using command and control. Remember, role of management in agile and sprints to help team to be better in self-organization and doing great job. And instead of asking for reports every day, all the time, ask yourself what you can do to help this team to be better, how to remove some of your the impediment. Obsession about artifacts. Another thing which is usually Scrum burn down, burn up, whatever you're using. Changes. Still, we said that when teams committed or forecast something what to do in the sprint, teams should be left and should be given time to achieve what they said they will do. You shouldn't try to change and force change into the sprint all the time. They should do. What usually happens in that scenario, you have velocity which is very volatile, and that doesn't help with the release plan. There is another habit which happens that teams continuously trying to estimation. They want to come with the perfect estimation. There is no such thing as a perfect estimation. Yeah, there is a question as well why we should estimate at all. Can we count number of requirements, for example? And I think two very important is lack of definition of done. We don't know what we consider as done requirements. So what's the set of action we should apply to any of requirements when we say there is implement? Yeah? And equally, there is no definition already. So definition already is what requirement need to satisfy to be considered next sprint. Definition of done is what requirements need to satisfy when we say we completed that requirement. Yeah. So this is two very important artifacts, and if you don't have that in your company, please try to have them. Yeah, try to think about that. Yeah, and the last one, but not least, how good you are with bugs. You have attitude that you don't want any bugs. You want zero bug policy or not. If you are capable of having zero bug policy, you're on a great journey. Yeah. Think about that. Don't let bugs slipping out of the sprint, yeah, because you will have a problem later. And that's about what I was planning to say. I think it took me a little bit longer, but let's see if we have any questions, yeah. Okay. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. I can't see any questions here. Anyone has any questions? There's a question about sending presentation. Yes, I think the presentation will be sent at the end. Let's do a few more minutes on the any more questions? Anyone, any question? Okay, if there is no questions, that will be all. Thank you very much for your time, and we may see each other next time. Thank you. Bye.